A very warm welcome to you, Professor Ross, to our esteemed sirs, and to all our members joining us today. I would like to begin by sharing a brief introduction to our organization. Millennium Mams is a trailblazing nonprofit that has been empowering women through financial literacy since 1993. Our visionary mentors have impacted the lives of more than 10,000 women, equipping them with the knowledge and confidence to actively participate in financial decision making. Today, our presence spans 21 Indian states and over 20 countries worldwide, a testament to the power of our purposeful learning and community. Our investment philosophy draws deep inspiration from the legendary Mr. Warren Buffett. In 2019, we had the honor of representing India at the Berkshire Hathaway AGM in Omaha as the country's largest women investors group. And at the heart of our learning community, our speaker series brings thought leaders from around the world to spark ideas, challenge perspectives, and connect us with those creating real-world impact. It is now my privilege to introduce our esteemed guest speaker for the day, Professor Alec Ross. Professor Ross is a New York Times best-selling author and distinguished professor at the Business School of the University of Bologna. He is the author of The Industries of the Future and The Raging 2020s, books that have been translated into 24 languages and become bestsellers across 5 continents. He is a board partner at Amplo, a global venture capital firm, and serves on the boards of companies spanning technology, media, health, and cybersecurity. His academic contributions include appointments at Johns Hopkins and Columbia, and his work has appeared in the Wall Street Journal, Foreign Policy, and other leading international journals. During the Obama administration, he served as Senior Advisor for Innovation to the Secretary of State, a role created especially for him, where he helped modernize diplomacy through technology. He also played a pivotal role in Barack Obama's 2008 campaign and transition team. From co-founding a global social enterprise that has served millions across 4 continents to being named one of the top 100 global thinkers by Foreign Policy magazine, Professor Ross has consistently demonstrated visionary leadership and global impact. He began his remarkable journey as a 6th grade teacher in inner-city Baltimore and continues to educate and inspire on a global scale. Professor Ross, your journey from the classrooms of Baltimore to the corridors of global diplomacy and innovation is nothing short of extraordinary. Your work continues to shape how we understand the forces transforming our world, and it is both a privilege and an inspiration to welcome you to our forum today. We have all been reading your book, The Raging 2020s, with great interest and are deeply honored to learn from your insights. And with great anticipation, we now invite you to address us, followed by Q&A session with our members.
Well, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. Thank you for the opportunity to spend some time with you all this afternoon. And thank you to my student, Mansi Bihani, who, as I mentioned, for those of you who didn't hear earlier, she got a perfect score in my class. She was outstanding. And she represented India well, and she represented Indian women very well in my class of 53 students from almost 20 countries. So she made you all very proud. Being
proud moment for us indeed to hear.
At the very top. So I'm very pleased to be able to spend this hour with you. I'm going to speak, the way we've organized it, I'm going to speak for about 20 minutes now, giving a sort of tour to horizon of a variety of different issues. But then we're going to do is we're going to open it up to your questions.
Okay.
For 4 of the 6 years that I worked for Barack Obama, I was a diplomat. I'm not a diplomat anymore, so I welcome even your undiplomatic questions if you have them.
We'll get plenty of them. Maybe.
Yes. Wonderful. So let me get started. So I want to touch on a handful of different topics, but building on the introduction that was made, give you a sense of the approach that I bring to my academic work, to my work as an entrepreneur, and it is interdisciplinary. A lot of us spend a lot of time getting very deeply expert in one thing. And we all need deep domain expertise in one thing. It helps us to be the very best at one thing. But I believe that interdisciplinarity, the ability of connecting information and skills across domains, is increasingly important. And as we think about how the economy is, as we think about how the economy is evolving. So, if you have expertise in something scientific or something technological or in jurisprudence or in something craft related, combining that with skills that you've developed in public speaking or behavioral psychology or emotional intelligence, the ability to sort of put together skills that traditionally don't go together, I think, are creating some of the more interesting and resilient people in tomorrow's world. And my own background reflects a little bit of that interdisciplinarity. So, as was mentioned during the introduction, I actually got my career started out of university teaching young children. So, teaching 12 and 13-year-old children in a very, very tough community in the United States. So, I've spent a lot of time in India and I've been in some of the really, really difficult, very poor slums. The United States has its own version of that as well, as you probably know from TV. And I taught in one of these communities for several years. And I taught in this community because I believe that talent is universally distributed, but opportunity is not. And so, one of the great missions in life that I have is to figure out how, if you fundamentally believe that talent is universally distributed, how can you enable that talent that oftentimes gets buried due to social circumstances or economic circumstances or family circumstances and liberate it? And much of my career since then has really been focused on that. And oftentimes using technology as a lever. So when I began this work in the 1990s, 30 some years ago, it was at the beginning of a very accelerated process of globalization, where, frankly, oftentimes labor in the United States was going to, and production was going from the United States to countries like yours, to India, to Mexico, to China. And one of the questions that I asked myself, I was like, okay, well, if certain kinds of labor, certain kind of work is being transferred in factories, in ports, in mines, in mills, for students from America's slums, how can they be resilient? How can they have economic futures that are better than their parents? And so I thought that technology was a great lever for this because a lot of the time, as you know, with young people, it doesn't matter if they have poor parents, middle class parents, or wealthy parents. When it comes to the use of technology, they are like fish in water. So I started a company, the purpose of which was to go into low-income communities. We started in the slums, and then we moved into the rural communities uh, to help bring access to technology and intensive skill training so that people could get good jobs. And this started in the United States, but it then spread into 10, 11, 12 other countries in the world. And it was at this time that I got to know Barack Obama. Barack Obama was a local official. He was a state senator on the south side of Chicago, working in a community that was almost all Black, with lots of people in subsidized public housing. And so I got to know him because this organization of mine, which used market forces, but which we incorporated as a nonprofit, we would do work to help, frankly, a lot of the Black and the Mexican American young people who were in the community where he lived and worked and which he represented, and help them get jobs. And it was from that that brought me into the world of government. So it was from there that I worked on his first presidential campaign and running technology and media policy, and then worked for him and for Hillary Clinton over a period of years. And so much of what I want to share are reflections that come from the experience of living this sort of interdisciplinary life that includes entrepreneurship, it includes academia, and it includes government. And one of the key theses is that land was the raw material of the agricultural age. Iron was the raw material of the industrial age. Data is the raw material of today and tomorrow's world. So during the agricultural age, he who owned the land or controlled the land had the power, the economic power or the political power. During the industrial age, he who owned the factories or controlled access to the natural resources had the power, the economic power, or the political power. But it's increasingly the case in today and tomorrow's world that data is the raw material. So he or she who own the data, control the data, or can harvest meaning from the data are those that are creating the industries and the businesses of the future. In the last 10 years, we've gone from a world of 15 billion networked devices to 75 billion. What do I mean by that? When I say a network device, I think about the laptop that I'm speaking to you from or this mobile phone. But it's also the sensors that are in our supply chains. It's all of the zeros and ones of computer code that run through our Internet of Things. And over the last 10 years, we've gone from 15 billion to 75 billion network devices. And what this means is that all of our industries are now digital. We can't say there's a digital industry and then there are these other industries. Every industry now is digital. I don't care if you are an artisan making jewelry. You still have to use digital tools to find your market and reach your market. If you're a big steel company, you are using digital tools to run your production processes, to run your waste management processes, to organize your human resources. So what we're seeing right now is a period of digitization that is going to continue apace. And India was beautifully positioned for this, beautifully positioned for this. You know, the Indian Institutes of Technology combined with other colleges and universities and also the educational infrastructure for younger students really helped India make the jump. And even in the United States, Indian Americans now play an incredibly prominent role in our economy. My partner in my venture capital fund, Sheetal Tayal, and his family is from Delhi. The CEO of Microsoft from India, the CEO of Google from India, the CEO of Federal Express from India, the CEO of IBM from India, one after another, one after another. Why? Because of a very strong foundation of education that was oriented to the future. So yes, it's good to read the classics, read literature. I do it. I was a medieval history major. It's very good to have that foundation. But if you can combine that with something that is technical in nature, then you really have the tools to ascend. And a lot of the world's technological leaders, not just in India, but also in the United States, are of Indian origin because they had that educational foundation and then they built on it. They built on it to build executive skills and what sometimes are called soft skills so that they could lead very large organizations. I believe that this is going to continue. And I think that it's going to be accelerated further by artificial intelligence. And what I want to do now is I want to take the next few minutes to talk specifically about AI. Also because your prime minister, when we were together, I had half an hour with him, and he, like you, the book that you are reading is a book that I'm sorry. The book that you read, that you are reading, he read it. And so what we did is we went almost chapter by chapter to discuss, Prime Minister Modi. He wasn't asking me about Donald Trump. He wasn't asking about politics. He was going chapter by chapter through the book and asking about how some of the themes within that related to India. And one of the key points I made was that India positioned itself very well within the last stage of digitization. But what is next is artificial intelligence. And so what I want to do now is I want to talk very quickly about some of what's happening in artificial intelligence and start by saying that artificial intelligence, it's sort of by itself, it means everything and nothing. I think you have to give some additional definition to what artificial intelligence really is. And start by pointing out that there are four kinds of artificial intelligence. Number one, perceptual artificial intelligence, and I'll come back and explain each of these briefly. Perceptual artificial intelligence is type one. Generative artificial intelligence is type two. Agentic artificial intelligence is type three. And physical artificial intelligence is type four. A quick explanation of each of these. Perceptual artificial intelligence is the AI that recognizes sounds, images, and text. So things like when I pick up my iPhone, it recognizes my face. That is perceptual artificial intelligence. Oftentimes, when I'm in a country where I don't speak the language, before there was ChatGPT, I used Google Translate. Google Translate recognized the text and would translate it. That's perceptual artificial intelligence. Things like Siri are perceptual artificial intelligence. I think of this as the AI from like 2015 to 2020. The AI that is occupying most of our attention today is generative artificial intelligence. These are things like America's ChatGPT or China's DeepSeek. And if I'm going to speak very directly to you, I actually think that India sort of missed the boat a bit on generative artificial intelligence by not having a truly competitive global platform. And right now, the platforms that are emerging are dominantly American and Chinese. But it's not it, and there's some people are upset about this, but what I say is before you get upset about this, let's focus on the next two areas of artificial intelligence, which I think are every bit as important, if not more, than the first two. The third is agentic artificial intelligence. What is agentic artificial intelligence? Agentic artificial intelligence builds on perceptual AI and generative AI. So generative AI is AI that produces original content. So I could go to ChatGPT and say, in a week, I have a meeting with Prime Minister Modi. Please write a 4-page report describing his reading habits and his views on the issues that I covered in my book, The Raging 2020s, and it'll produce that content. So generative AI produces original content. Agentic AI builds on perceptual AI and generative AI, and it has the new capability of autonomy and the ability to complete tasks. What does that mean? Let me give a concrete example. If I were to say, okay, I am in Bologna, Italy, and I need to get to Chennai, middle of next week. I could say to generative AI, I could say to ChatGPT, okay, give me all of my travel options for traveling from Bologna, Italy to Chennai. Let me know the plane routes, if I need to take a train, what the costs are, and let me know if there are some hotels that you would recommend in Chennai, and this is my budget. Agentic AI would do all of that research, and then it could do the bookings for you. So it could come back and say, Alec, we actually found these two hotels in Chennai, this one and this one. Which one would you prefer? You choose, and it then does the booking for you. It gives you, it says, oh, Alec, you should take the train from Bologna to Milan, take the direct flight from Milan to Delhi and connect to Chennai. This is the route we recommend. And then we'll actually book that travel for you. That is agentic AI. And as much as we're focusing on generative AI today, on May 8th, 2026, 1 year from now, everybody's going to be focused on agentic AI, on AI that has the capacity of task completion. And so I think that India, having missed out in substantial part on generative AI, still has the opportunity to be a leader building out capacity in agentic AI. And then there's number 4, which is physical AI. And physical AI is where artificial intelligence meets the real world. So these are robots, these are drones. These are the artificial intelligence systems in agriculture, where you can digitize a farm, and instead of just irrigating because it's Tuesday and it's sunny, the sensors in the farm will tell you the precise amount of water and the precise area to do irrigation so that you have a more sustainable use of fertilizers or of water or whatever your other inputs are. So when I think about AI and when I think about the context of India, I really think it's important to understand what AI is and to understand these 4 different types and to understand the opportunity for India now is principally in agentic AI and in physical AI. And to the extent that we do skills development, to the extent that we do studying, to the extent that we do investing in development in this area, I think it's really there. I'm almost up with my allotted 20 minutes for speaking, but I did want to make a final point or two. And that is on where I see the 196 country chessboard. Okay, there are 196 countries on planet Earth with about 8 billion people. 1.3, 1.4 billion of whom are in India. And the way that I think about this 196 country chessboard is I think we're in a very interesting moment of geopolitical and geoeconomic reordering. From 1945 to 1989, the principal political and economic binary in the world was the struggle between Soviet Union-sponsored communism and socialism versus American-sponsored democratic capitalism. Then there was the perception, with the fall of the Berlin Wall and the fall of communism in 1989, that there was sort of a triumph of the American model. And from 1990 onward, until somewhat recently, there was this idea that there was this model of democratic capitalism that had won. But what we then saw were the emergence of other models of growth and of governance. China obviously went in its own direction. Russia went in its own direction. India, interestingly now, like many countries around the world, the Gulf countries, Turkey, Brazil, and others, is choosing not to say we're on this team, this American team, or this team, this Chinese team. We are our own team. We have autonomy. We have national interests. We have our own vision and values for our own future. So in a world of 196 countries, what I think is we are seeing less dominance by 1 or 2 countries. There will always be countries that are stronger than others, but less dominance and more individual agency at the national level. And so I do think that this is very interesting for India in a moment where it can sort of define its own future, not as a part of the Chinese team or of the American team, but as its own team, and going issue to issue, issue to issue, and figuring out what its strategy is and figuring out with whom it aligns. Sometimes it might be with Europe. Sometimes it might be with China. Sometimes it might be with the United States. Sometimes it might take India might take its own sort of singular route to the future. And what's interesting is most countries can do this, but they don't have the level of capacity and agency that India does. And whether you like Modi or not, one thing that I think is indisputable is that he does have a very specific vision and he does have a lot of power, and he has the willingness and ability to execute that power. So the combination of capacity fueled by 1.3, 1.4 billion people, plus the political power of Modi, means that India has more agency now. It has more ability to define its own future now than it's had since independence. And obviously before independence. So it's a very, very interesting moment, in my opinion, for India right now. This has been sort of a very thin gloss over a number of topics, but rather than giving, a very, very long lecture, what we really wanted to do was open this up to your questions. It can be on topics related to foreign affairs and geopolitics. It can be about the United States. It can be about India. It can be about technology. Whatever curiosities you may have, if I have the capacity to answer you, I happily will.
Thank you so much, Professor Ross. That was truly insightful and very thought-provoking, and especially all the details you gave about your views on India. It's it's showing us a lot of optimism about our country. And now we have a lot of questions for you. And without further ado, I would like to invite our member, Mansi Bihani, who's your A student, to moderate the Q&A session. Mansi, can we have you here, please?
Thank you, Meghna, for those kind words. And a very warm thank you to Dhanuka sir and Millennium Mams for this absolute privilege to moderate today's session. I think I've done well in my lessons because I've had the privilege to learn from the best. Professor Ross, buongiorno, and thank you for this extended opportunity to ask you questions. You've sparked my curiosity and completely rewired the way I look at the world and my own country. And I'm so very grateful to you for that. I'd like to begin with yet another question today because I think your book, your talks just leave us with so many. You highlight two contrasting models of public-private dynamics, especially the way technology is governed and levered. On one end, we see big tech, Apple, Google, Meta, who identify themselves as global rather than American companies. And then on the other end, we have China's public-private sector working in close coordination to drive national agenda. Given these extremes, Professor Ross, what could be the right mix for India as its own team, especially in strategic sectors like critical minerals, data, energy?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that look, I have a bias in this, which is that I think to the maximum extent possible that this can be driven by the private sector and by the entrepreneurs, that's better. It has to be in the national interest. But I really believe that when government and business gets too close, it can become problematic. I think it's good for government to set strategy and for government to set incentives. But I think that when we see so much overlap between business and government that you don't know where one starts and one stops, this is when there oftentimes is corruption. This is when there oftentimes is a lack of efficiency. So what I would say is that if there, you want to have balance, you don't want to have the private sector, business sector operating completely independently as a bunch of cowboys. But I do think that the balance should be much more tilted toward government setting standards and incentives, and then the entrepreneur really being able to drive things. I do think that in India, for example, if and when things get too close, that's when corruption shows up. And it also oftentimes can create circumstances where you get these huge companies, and it becomes very hard for startups to emerge within that context, because they will use government not just for the purposes of offense, but also for the purposes of defense, of protecting their position in the market.
Thank you, Professor Ross, for that clarity-filled and bold perspective, truly aligning with the qualities of our leaders here, as well as the PM of our country. We would now open the floor to the audience for questions. I'd like to invite Alia to share her question with Professor Ross.
Hello, Professor Ross. Thank you so much for your time. I know it's very late in Italy. This has been a wonderful talk, and I'm so excited to hear everything you had to say. I actually graduated from George Washington University recently. Last year, had some incredible professors. So thank you for what you guys do for us. I don't even think you know the impact you have had on our lives. So thank you very, very much. I've been very interested in American politics my whole life. My brother still lives and works in Washington, D.C. We're always talking about it, debating about it. I wanted to know what you thought was the most intriguing bit about Mr. Barack Obama. What made him such a successful president, and how did he run such a successful campaign? What was that differential factor?
They're great questions. So I think that what made him most successful was his preparation. People didn't see it. And, I'll give you sort of an inside view. I ran technology and media policy for the first presidential campaign. And I think I saw the real secret to Barack Obama's success was that Michelle, his wife, she would go to bed at about 10 p.m., 10:15 p.m. But Barack would stay up for about 2 more hours. And from 10:15 p.m. to like 12:15, 12:30, he prepared himself for the next day. So, one of the things when I was working for him, I always wanted to make sure that my memos were at the top of the stack of his nighttime reading. And it was the same with Hillary Clinton. They were so well prepared. Like they were powerful, they were famous, but they worked harder than anybody else. And it didn't matter if they were meeting with a group of civil society group from Ghana or with Putin, the level of preparation was the same. So that I think, he has natural abilities, charisma, public speaking, intellect. But I think a lot of the time people who have lots of natural abilities can also become lazy, and they use those natural abilities to make up for a lack of preparation sometimes. So Barack was at his best when he prepared. Going to the campaign, why was that so successful? It was interesting. We knew, so we were running first against Hillary Clinton, then against John McCain. So we knew that Barack, because he was relatively new to politics, we knew that Clinton or McCain had much longer relationships, much bigger infrastructure. So we knew that they would run the best 20th century campaign. The only way to beat them was to run the first 21st century campaign. So what we did is we out-innovated them. And I'll give you sort of a very simple example, because when I went to work for Hillary, she sort of looked at me. She goes, "Alec, how did you beat me?" And I gave her an example. If you take a state like Idaho, which is like almost all white, and all these demographic factors would say that Hillary Clinton should have beaten Barack Obama in Idaho, but Obama beat her. How did we do it? There was actually a technological element to it, which was the traditional model of campaigning in Idaho would be you send some 25-year-old to the state, and he or she sort of organizes everybody in a relatively uniform basis. Idaho for Hillary. What we did is we used technology, and this is now fairly obvious, but it was wildly innovative in 2007 and 2008, where we gave people the capacity to self-organize. So instead of like Idaho for Obama, if you were from a city like Pocatello, we learned that persuasion was most intense when it was within a common group. So right now I'm looking, there are 347 people on this conference call within a country of 1.4 billion people. If something is organized within this community of 347 people by another member, it's going to be much more effective than a campaign directed to reach 1.4 billion people. It's going to be much more personalized. So what we did is we used technology to do personalization. So instead of Idaho for Obama, people would organize at the city level and say, Pocatello, Idaho for Obama. And then it would get more specific. Potato farmers would organize it. Potato farmers from Pocatello. So it'd be potato farmers from Pocatello from Obama. Then left-handed potato picking Pocatillans for Obama. And so how to take a country of 320 million people and create unit sizes like the size of this call, 347 people. So the best way to persuade, for example, the members of this call on any given topic is not to develop something for 1.4 billion people, but to develop instruments that allow things to be local, to be targeted to 347 people. So that's sort of how we did it. That plus the natural gifts of Barack Obama.
Of course, and there are many. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Could we now have Pooja Agarwal for her question?
Hello, good afternoon, Professor. Professor, in the book, you've highlighted both the dangers and potential of corporate leadership in addressing global crisis. So what's your view on CEO activism and its legitimacy?
So that's an incredibly complex question. I think that with great power comes great responsibility.
Yes.
So I think that a lot of these huge companies, not just American, but if you think about companies like Tata, Ambani, many others, they have great power. And I think with that power, they can use that power for good or for ill. And when the difference between them and governments is there isn't democratic consent, right? So if Mark Zuckerberg decides to do something, there's no election. He, by virtue of his wealth and his power and his control of global platforms, he can control platforms and he can harness power. So what do I think of CEO activism? I think that it needs to be measured, targeted, and for the greater good, not for the personal good. I think that we are going to need CEOs. If we are going to combat climate change, it has to include the private sector. If we are going to have a more inclusive society, then it has to include CEOs. But by the same token, if they use that power for a set of goals that are more societal, then it becomes very dangerous. And Pooja, there's also, like, I have my eyes open. There's also a level of subjectivity here. So my values, what I think is in the societal interest, might be different than what the CEO thinks. So right now, for example, in the United States, there's an absolute war over the topic of diversity, equity, and inclusion. If you've read that book, then you know that I believe that a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive society is a healthier society. But this is my subjective personal view. Other CEOs view DEI as being inherently bigoted itself and believe that it's discriminatory, for example, against white men. There's a belief that women, particularly women of color, have, not by virtue of meritocracy, but have been given opportunities that in a purely meritocratic world would have gone to white men. So there is a big gray space here. So I have my views, Pooja, but I recognize that there's also, there's also a level of subjectivity to this. But the short answer to your question is, I think that CEO activism is I think we need CEOs to address every grand challenge. We aren't going to address things like climate change or other such things without them. But when that CEO activism serves a personal as opposed to societal goal, it becomes very, very dangerous.
Yes. Thank you, sir. I get your point, and it's very valid. Thank you.
Next, I'd like to invite Dolphy to share her question, please.
Hi, good afternoon. I have a background in art and design, so this has been really insightful in sort of developing the soft skills, as you mentioned. So I wanted to ask you, in context of the geopolitical tension and the economic fragmentation that you spoke about, how do you think India can navigate itself into balancing between the interest of its citizens and the growing corporate sector and its like global role?
Yes, so let me just ask for a clarifying question on that, Dolphy. When you say the corporations, do you mean Indian corporations or corporations around the world?
Indian corporations and also like global corporations that come to India, as India has been in highlight and it's quite growing, visibly showing. So how can it balance itself in this sort of geopolitical tension environment? And that's because you also
So-
2020. So do you think see a negative impact in the years down the line?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Repeat the last thing that you said. Yeah, you lost your voice there a second.
About in like the raging 2020. So like in industrialization also, there's a requirement of social sort of contract like changes. So do you see that in the near years in India?
Yeah, so here's what I think. India's development has been so recent that it does not have a long history of the kind of social infrastructure and the kind of social contract that exists in other countries. Here's my view on your question. The first thing I would do if I were India is I would do a lot to make sure that companies around the world, whether you're Chinese, whether you're American, whether you're European, know that India is open for business. When external capital, like when Apple wants to build iPhones in India, that produces jobs. And so I really think that, I have a view that India should reduce its barriers to enabling foreign capital to come in, because ultimately with 1.4 billion people, that's a lot of people who need jobs. And for all of the positive that's happened in India in recent years, you still have a high percentage of your citizens living in poverty. And so I think the best way to remedy that is for external capital to come in. Obviously, when those outside investors come in and they build factories, they build plants and other such things, they have to play by the local rules. The opportunity, and I spoke with Modi about this a little bit, is to begin to think about what are those investments that can be made that share the benefits of these investment. And I think right now, like my own bias is in infrastructure. So there's all this boom that's taken place in India, but it's very hard for the infrastructure to keep up, whether it's transportation infrastructure, whether it's clean water infrastructure, whether it's infrastructure. So my view is that honestly the best long-term payoff for the capital that's coming in is for the state to invest in infrastructure, because ultimately that infrastructure is benefiting the largest number of people possible, particularly transportation, clean water, these sorts of things, enabling your agricultural sector to have precision agriculture and other such things. That's my view on this.
Thank you. Thank you.
I must add that Professor Ross highlighted the exact same industries that our teachers and mentors here talk about: infrastructure, agriculture, on point. And with that, I think we've come to the end of the session. Unfortunately, I think no one really wants it to end, but we've reached the time. So Professor Ross, thank you once again for your generosity, for your time and the most candid inputs. It's been a power-packed roaring afternoon here in India with you. I will now hand over to Shrishti Agarwal, Global Committee member, for the vote of thanks.
Thank you. Professor, your presence and enlightening words have truly graced our day. From your expertise as a visionary thinker, innovator, and accomplished author, investor, we have truly gained a lot. We are definitely taking back your points, like using technology and data in our digital world, preparedness, building soft skills, and how better we can use AI in our daily lives. So thank you for those. And on behalf of everyone, I'd like to thank you for your time and effort you have taken to share your invaluable experience and wisdom with us. And lastly, thank you to and the members for attending today's session. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Let me conclude by thanking you, and just with one final 30-second observation. One thing I love about India and Indians, and I know it's terrible to be speaking about people in generalities, but I'm going to do it anyway. Part of why there's been so much success in recent years by Indians in India and also Indians abroad is the willingness to work hard. It's the grit. It's the ambition followed by the willingness to do the hard work. And so for all of you, this is how you win. If you work harder than that other person, it doesn't guarantee that you're going to be the one who's successful, but it advantages you significantly. And one of the things that I love about India and Indians is this willingness to do the hard work, to do that extra bit of studying, to read that book, to, and to do it with a good spirit, to not view it as an obligation, but to view it as something nourishing. So let me all encourage you to continue on this path. Thank you to all of you, and have a great rest of your day.